Okay, we're going to look at negotiating in under 8 minutes. It's a really important subject, negotiating, because it can make a big difference to your personal life, but also to the bottom line of your work. So 8 minutes negotiating. Now, the first part of the process, and I do think it's part of the process, is to decide to do it. And my top two pieces of advice about deciding to do it would be, first of all, that it's a game. Don't let pride and embarrassment start to get in there. Just be detached and think of it as a game. The second bit of advice I would say is you can always crumble. And what this means is that if you are buying and you make a low offer and they refuse to budge, you can always pay their price. If you have to, and you can crumble and say, all right, I'll pay the full price. And similarly, if you're selling and you're trying to get a really high price, if you have to, you can always crumble and you can come down to the amount that they're offering you. So don't worry about losing the deal because of negotiating. You won't. Now, then we start what you might call the process proper. And the first part of the process is planning. This is incredibly important. Most people don't spend enough time planning. And the absolute rule number one for planning, and in fact, I'm going to write this in red because it's so important, is set your limit and never go beyond it. Incredibly important whenever you negotiate for anything is to decide, if you're buying, what's the most you'll pay for it, and if you're selling, what's the lowest you'll come down to before you're prepared to just walk away from the deal. So what is your walk away point or your limit? And you must decide that before you go in, and you must always stick to it. Because when you walk away, you're proving to yourself that you're prepared to do it, and that makes you stronger for next time. The other thing to prepare is to think about their position, particularly their fears and their weaknesses. Because when we negotiate, we tend to feel weak. For example, if you're buying a house, you think, I'm in love with this house, I've got to have it. But think about the fact that they are probably desperate to sell it. And similarly, when you're selling your house, you feel weak. I've got to get rid of this house. I found another one I want to buy. But think about the fact that the buyer is also weak because they've probably looked at loads of houses and yours is the only one they like. So always think about their position and their weaknesses, but also think about the things that they might really want, because that gives you the ability to trade, which I'll come on to in a minute. So the next step of negotiating after the planning is called the preamble. And this is the initial chat where you're just asking them, why are you selling it? How's business? Just that kind of social chat, which doesn't seem very significant, but actually it can be. And there are two things to do during the preamble. And the first one is to ask lots of questions and listen, because you're looking for their weaknesses, but also the things that they want that you might be able to offer them in exchange for some sort of deal. So we want to really understand them. Don't talk about yourself because you're giving away information. Just find out as much as you can about them. And the other key thing to know about the preamble is don't open first. Now, you may have to, but you should avoid opening first if you possibly can. If you can get the other person to open first, it might be good news. If you're buying, it might be a really cheap price. If you're selling, they might offer you a large amount of money for what you're selling. So if you can persuade them to open first, you should do that. If they open first and it's bad news, well, then you ignore it and you put in your counter offer, and that's fine. Then it's game on. Then we come to the next part of the process, which is opening offers. And the first thing is open wide. So if you're buying, you should make a really low opening offer, because if you don't ask, you don't get. And you might get a real bargain. That's the best you're ever going to get, is your opening offer. So you may as well try for that. And if 1 time in 10 you get it, it's worth it. All the rest of the time, you'll have to come down from that price if you're selling. You'll have to come up from that price if you're buying. But that's okay, because you can crumble all the way to their price if you have to. You'll probably end up halfway in between, in which case a good opening offer will have helped you quite a lot. So open wide. And the other thing about opening offers is not a round number. Because if you say to somebody, how about 20 grand? Then that's such a round number, it just sounds made up. If you say the most I can afford is 19,400, that sounds much more scientific, as if you really have accurately worked out the value of what it is, or you've added up all the last few pence in your piggy bank and that's all you've got. So it's much more powerful and scientific sounding if you use non-round numbers, not just for your opening offer, but for every offer that you make during the process. Now, once you've both made your opening offers, you're into the phase known as bargaining. And this is where you have to get to somewhere in between your opening offer and their opening offer. And it's probably going to be in the middle, but it ideally would be nearer to your offer than to their offer. Now, some people think that bargaining is what negotiating is, but actually by the time you get to bargaining, it's more or less over because you've both opened. You're going to be roughly in between. But there are a couple of important things to know about with bargaining. And the first one is clearly move in small steps. Because if you make an opening offer and then you move a long way from that, first, you're giving away quite a lot of money, but also you're signalling that there's a lot more still to go. So the key is to only move a small amount from your starting point, which sends them a signal that they're not going to get much more out of you. So move in small steps. And then the other part of bargaining, which is really important, is to always trade. And the format for trading is to say, if you, then I. So rather than just, oh, all right, I'll pay you another £500, you should say, if you give me this, then I can pay you another £500. Or if you're selling, you'd say, if you can give me this, then I could come down by £500. If you'll mention me on your website, if you'll buy 3 instead of 1, then I can do you a cheaper price. Whatever the tradable is, you should always offer it when you're coming down in price when you're selling and when you're coming up in price when you're buying. So it's a good idea to prepare a list of tradables before you start the negotiation. So you've got them ready to play like a pack of cards when you're in there. Now the final phase of negotiating is the close. It's pretty much all done by now, but it can all slip away from you in this final stage. And 2 big things to look out for in the close. One of them is splitting the difference. So if the other person says, split the difference, your answer should be no, I just can't. And they will go, oh, all right then. And the final thing to look out for at the close is the nibble. And this is where, at the end, after you've got an agreement, they add on something else. Oh, you don't mind delivering on a Sunday, do you? Or you don't mind changing this bit for me, do you? And the nibble can be done by buyers or sellers. So buyers can say, oh, can I just have one more thing? And sellers can say, oh, by the way, this bit here costs extra. And you have to be really careful about the nibble because all of your profit margin can go. If they nibble 10% off you, suddenly this becomes a loss-making deal probably. So the answer to the nibble is no. We've already agreed this and that should be included. And you can prevent the nibble happening by halfway through asking, are there any extras that I don't know about? Is there anything else included in this deal that we haven't talked about yet? And if they say no, that's everything, you've got them and they can't nibble you later. So that's a very quick overview of negotiating. There's loads more to it than that. I hope that's been useful. That is negotiating in under 8 minutes.